From being related to the lead singer of the famous band My Chemical Romance, to having a mansion-like studio that's fit for kings, here are some things you never knew about Joe Rogan. First off, did you know Joe's related to the lead singer from My Chemical Romance? Yup, during a Joe Rogan Experience episode, Kevin Smith had a burning question for the podcaster. Turns out, Smith had met the lead singer of My Chemical Romance before coming on the podcast, and he had a hunch that Joe's grandmother might be named Josie. But how did he know that? Well, he confirmed it with Rogan, and then out of the blue, mentioned the name Gerard Way. And you won't believe what Rogan says next. He casually goes, "Yeah, we're related, we're cousins." Turns out Joe's grandmother, Josephine Spadone, was actually Gerard Way's aunt. Small world, huh? But even though they share some family ties, Joe and Gerard ended up pursuing totally different paths to greatness. And the most shocking thing is that the two haven't ever met or spoken to each other. One time, an interviewer asked Joe if he knew Gerard and his brother Mikey Way, and Joe's response was classic. He goes, "Nah, man, I never met those dudes. They're like some distant weird cousin thing. I wouldn't even recognize them if I saw them." But that isn't the only secret he's been keeping from us. There was also his brawl on Fear Factor, when one contestant on the show had some serious anger issues and got into a physical fight with Joe. Poor Rogan tried to calm the situation down, but this contestant just wouldn't quit. He kept on pushing Joe's buttons until he reached his breaking point. And that's when things got real interesting, cause Joe straight up grabbed the dude by the head. Thankfully, the other contestant stepped in and helped defuse the whole thing. Joe later talked about what went down, and admitted that he pushed the guy away to defend himself. Joe said he wasn't about to get punched in the face, so he resorted to grabbing the guy instead. He made it clear that he didn't want to hurt him though. Joe confessed that in the heat of the moment, he even considered choking the guy, but he quickly realized that choking someone could lead to some serious legal trouble, so he wisely chose not to go down that road. But that's not the weirdest thing about him. I mean, him owning a floating sensory deprivation tank has to take the cake, cause this thing is mind-blowing. Fans know Joe's all about exploring the depths of his inner subconscious mind, and he's found that float therapy is the way to go. So he went ahead and got himself a tank for some relaxation and meditation sessions. He says his experiences with meditation in this tank have seriously leveled up his performance. The tank works like this. First, it's filled with water that's heated up to match your body temperature. Then, around 800 pounds of salt is added to the mix. This saltiness creates a buoyant environment where you can effortlessly float. Once the tank is ready, Joe then hops right in and lets the relaxation begin. Who even told him to do this though? Well, turns out Joe gets a lot of these ideas from other celebrities. For instance, did you know Jordan Peterson was the reason why he once started a carnivore diet? A couple of years back, Rogan had a special guest on his podcast, the one and only controversial psychologist, Jordan Peterson. Now, during their epic conversation, Peterson shared that he'd gone all in on a carnivore diet, and apparently, Rogan was totally sold by the idea and decided to give it a shot too. But that's where things took an unexpected turn. Joe started experiencing some serious tummy troubles. Like, I'm talking explosive diarrhea here, y'all. Not exactly the glamorous side of trying out a new diet. All that bathroom time led to some major fluid loss, which meant Joe started shedding pounds like crazy. It got so bad that he had to put an end to it, because the bathroom runs were just too much to handle. But hey, he gives credit where credit is due. The podcaster actually thanked Peterson for inspiring him to try out the carnivore diet in the first place. It might not have been a long-lasting love affair with meat-only meals, but at least it was an interesting experiment. Now you might be wondering, what's a guy like this doing in the UFC? Well, before you underestimate him, let me fill you in a little on his fighting background. Did you know that he's not just a podcasting legend, but also a badass martial artist? It's true! He has black belts in Taekwondo, Jean-Jacques Machado's traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's part of the 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu crew, thanks to his close friend Eddie Bravo. And the next question that comes is, if he was so good, why didn't he go pro with all that talent? Joe actually dabbled in amateur kickboxing and scored 2 wins and 1 loss. Plus, he even tried professional boxing. But then he started experiencing recurring headaches. And well, that was it, because he didn't want to damage his health for this profession. That said, wait till you find out about this other cool gig he had when he was younger. I mean, he actually worked with a private investigator once. After he let go of kickboxing, he didn't have a lot of options left. The podcaster didn't even have a college degree, so he had to take on all sorts of odd jobs just to make ends meet. One of those odd jobs landed him in a rather unexpected gig, working alongside Dave Dolan, a private investigator. Dave needed someone to drive him around after a DUI incident left him unable to hit the road himself. And guess who became Dave's right-hand man? None other than our buddy Rogan. It was basically Joe chauffeuring a private investigator around town. But here's the really cool part. Joe and Dave formed a solid friendship that extended way beyond their driving adventures. Even after Joe found success as a comedian, they stayed tight. But sadly, Dave passed away after battling cancer. That wasn't the only side hustle Joe had though, because he had some gigs at Disney too. Yup, the super ripped commentator for the UFC was actually part of the Disney crew. He even had an acting gig on this show called Hardball, but unfortunately, it only lasted for one season. Later, he hit the jackpot and got a sweet gig on news radio, and it was a game changer. He described his character on the show as a watered-down, censored version of himself. But even more bizarre than the Disney gig were his first few comedy gigs. When Joe jumped into the world of comedy, he had to work his way up like everyone else. He became known for his unique style of comedy, often referred to as blue comedy, which was all about pushing boundaries and tackling topics that some might find offensive. It's the kind of comedy that isn't afraid to venture into risque territory, particularly when it comes to sexual subjects. Blue comedy often touches on stereotypes and even explores the idea that men tend to think with their private parts, while women think with their hearts. It's definitely not everyone's cup of tea. But this unique comedic style opened up some interesting doors for him. He found himself getting invited to perform at various venues, including strip clubs and bachelor parties. These places were known for embracing the nature of his comedy, where those taboo and risque topics were right at home. But the tough time has passed for the podcaster, and now he's the king of his domain. I mean, have you seen his studio? It's truly fit for a king. You might think that when you watch him on screen, he's just sitting in a tiny little room with a bunch of people squeezed in. But according to Cheng Mazervi, who's in the know, Joe's studio is like stepping into a whole other universe. It has a massive foyer that feels like a fancy museum, filled with cool displays of all kinds of things. There's also a gigantic gym right there in the studio, and I'm not talking about your average gym. It's probably bigger than a high school basketball gym, packed with state-of-the-art equipment and all kinds of fighting gear. Plus, there's an indoor archery range, so his guests can channel their inner Robin Hood and shoot some arrows right there in the studio. And yeah, there's a kitchen because, hey, we all need fuel to keep the conversation going. But seriously, this place is like the ultimate man cave. Cheng Mazervi even called it the Buckingham Palace of man caves. So there you have it. From having a mansion-like studio that's fit for kings to being related to the lead singer of the famous band My Chemical Romance. Those were some things you never knew about Joe Rogan.